Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where sales leaders teach you what's working for them so you can build it yourself. Feeling ready to kick your sales into high gear? We're here to help. Check out our sales coaching and consulting services at predictablerevenue.com. Mase, great to see you. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, appreciate it. Glad to be here.
I'm excited to have this conversation with you because I mean, you and I've had kind of a version of this conversation a few times. And I thought, you know what, I've had the opportunity to learn from entrepreneurs and, where their first customers have come from so many times. I thought I want to have this conversation again and just hit record and share it with everybody. Because I think it's one of the scariest things when you're first starting a company is, okay, I've got this idea now. And like, maybe we built a thing. Now what? And then you're sitting at this, like, there's so many different channels, so many different tools, so many different pieces of advice that, VCs and entrepreneurs and your friends are telling you. And you're like, oh, I could do literally anything. How do I figure out what to do next? And so I'm excited to hear your story. I would like to start with Fixify. Where did the idea, what's the genesis of Fixify?
Yes, it's a good question. We didn't start with the idea first, like the concept of like, what problem do we want to solve in the market and how are we going to do that? Myself and my two co-founders actually met at another company, and we had all kind of come there somewhat independently. They had worked together before, but it was essentially it was taking a services business and basically SaaSifying it, like, for lack of better terms, right? And so what does that mean is, well, basically, how do you take what is typically a one-to-one, right, or a services-based solution and start to introduce that SaaS level of scale? So, right, most people do that by creating a pretty website, making pricing easy, but what about all the underlying pieces of, like, there's a set of humans that are involved in helping that company or that solution get to whatever outcome they're looking for? And so that was kind of the thing we ended up either directly or indirectly or intentionally or unintentionally doing throughout our careers, right? We're mostly services type capabilities. And so we did that in the security space. We were early employees, not founders. Back at Expel is where we did that. And so as we are wrapping up our, year 7 journey, we're kind of looking around, okay, like, what's next, right? And we started with, well, what are we good at? Right? What's the pattern of capabilities that we bring to bear? And it was this scaling these, what are traditionally services-based businesses, right? And SaaS, like, both experiences, but also obviously margins, because that's where our VC friends get happy. And so we started looking around and saying, okay, what's close enough to security? Like, what's a cousin, right? We were going to move into like financial services or healthcare because we all grew up in the security space, and a lot of IT is fundamental for that. And so that's kind of where it started. I think it was one of my co-founders was like, well, what about the IT space, right? Like, haven't seen a lot of people running into there, right? Not a lot of new companies popping up. Is there an opportunity there? Or are there just a bunch of dead bodies in a dark room and we don't know what's going to happen? So that was like the first moment of like, okay, we've got a thing. Maybe let's go play around with it for a little bit.
I imagine every founder's thought about this of like, what am I going to do next? And I have like a part of me has this like just crave to do something new and like go into a new space. Like, I've been in sales and sales tech for a while. I'm like, what if I, a side project I did when the pandemic hit was a B2C fitness app. And like, obviously not my skill set, but I really enjoyed that. How do you feel about going into something that was so close to what you were doing before?
Look, I think there's a bit of imposter syndrome in everybody, right? So there's always a little bit of like, should I do this? Can I do this? Right. As you're starting off on a new endeavor. And so I think that gave me a bit of comfort because it's like, look, there's parts of this problem or it's parts of the problem or the solution set that you understand that you've kind of earned. For me, it's earning stretch, right? That's where all these gray hairs come from. And so you want to bring that along with you. I wouldn't feel super comfortable if I'm going into a whole new industry with a whole new business model with a customer problem I don't even understand, because I think I would have to learn a lot and someone would have to pay for that learning, right? That comes at a cost. And so how do I really take what we already know? And for me, I'm blessed that I have 2 amazing co-founders, right? We each bring different skill sets. So we kind of de-risk that a little bit. But for me, it's like, there's got to be, for me to be comfortable, there's got to be something I can translate over with me, right? In doing so.
Fair enough. So you kind of had the space settled. All right, let's kind of look at the IT space. Was it the co-founder idea? Were you guys brainstorming? Were you talking to customers? Like, how did you go from, okay, let's go in this direction to Fixify?
Yeah. So the first thing we said is, okay, it's IT space. Now what problems exist in the space? Like, what are we seeing? And then again, how does that match to what we bring to the table? And so my immediate reaction was like, we scale services, right? So what IT services are provided, and help desk was like kind of a very standoutish thing. So think like, go to every market research report you can find, any of those key players, and start downloading reports, reading those, and just getting and doing a bunch of research about like, what would a hypothesis statement look like? What's a concept that we could put together and start validating? And what we came up with was, we think there's an opportunity to go into the help desk space and help organizations scale their help desk, but maintain a level of care, right? As you were doing so. And so like, cool, that's the hypothesis. Put that on the wall. And now the mom test book shows up, right? It's like, okay, this is a book that's been widely used, widely celebrated. Let's start looking at how do we take that concept, that hypothesis, and start researching it and understanding it and talking to people. And so we were lucky in that we had relationships. We had a very good relationships with some venture capitalists that we had worked with in the past. And so they were kind of ready to be like, okay, cool. If you've got a concept, we're willing to be on the journey with you, which was pretty awesome. And that really let us leave our current jobs and really validate hypothesis full time. And so that's kind of what we did. We ended up doing that. And then basically, best advice I ever got is start selling day one. So the company started September 1st of 2023. We had our first call on September 1st of 2023, right? And so we were talking to customers about the concept and what we were trying to build. And now I'm probably on conversation number 450, right? Here we are now in January of 2025. And it's a thing that we're not stopping. Like, that's the best way to get feedback, is talk to as many prospects or people that are in the space as possible.
And 400 conversations in, it's still you leading the charge.
Yeah. Well, so we've upgraded big time. I joke, but I'm not a professional go-to-market expert. So in September, we brought in a sales leader to help join me in the fight. However, I'm still involved, right? I think it's an important part of the company, because part of our sales leader is really figuring out the go-to-market experimentation. I'm figuring out the product and operations experimentation, right? Which is like, what's the feedback we need to take to the product team and the delivery team to adjust and learn as we're going through this, right? And so that was like thing number one. Thing number two is we saw enough demand in pipeline. So we looked at our pipeline, the customers that we were closing, and kind of looked at it and said, okay, we see a path to like that first million, right? First $500,000 in ARR, where we feel comfortable bringing in some help for me on the go-to-market side.
Love it. If we can go right back to those, I love that you started selling at day one. And when you say selling, I don't think you were saying, hey, you're trying to close deals on day one. You were asking customers, you were getting out of the building. What did that process look like? How many of those conversations did you have before you actually started building something?
Yeah. So we decided what we were going to do was start with a basic framework of what we were going to build, right? That was basically an architecture diagram with what would a customer experience on into that. I still literally have it. That was a good old age story of a piece of paper with a pencil, because we had to start with something, right? And our market research kind of guided us to that, right? In terms of like what that was. And then it was like, cool, now I got to go talk to some people and validate it. And so we basically at the beginning were like, we're going to talk to 10 people, and then we're going to just stop and recess. Like 10 conversations, and then what happens? And we kind of did that 3 times, right? And right about the 30 mark, we're like, okay, we've adjusted this down to a narrow enough focus where we can continue to learn and experiment. And so that was kind of the first thing. Set a goal, set an accountability point, and just go talk to 10 people that you believe would benefit in the thing you're building, that have the problem you think they have. That started to really focus me, because I'm like, I have to go have 10 conversations. I will go anywhere and talk to anybody that I can that fits the mold of the people I'm trying to talk to, right?
Love it. Where did those first 10 folks come from? Like, were you working your network? Were you cold outbounding? Were you, what did that look like?
This is my favorite. It's never, well, for me, in my experience, like everyone thinks there's just one thing that's going to get it done. No, I learned about how to talk or how to get access to people from all kinds of places. I was listening to podcasts. I was actually on your newsletter, right? I was going anywhere to open up, as they say, my RAS to figure out like, where can I talk to folks? So obviously the VC networks, right? All the VCs have some level of access to talking to people. I think the thing that was most important across all the sources, so VC networks, there's a platform called User Interviews. There's a platform called Office Hours. There's a platform called Sage Tap that we ended up using a little bit later. There's our own LinkedIn networks, right? The thing that we did that was most beneficial across all that is we said, who are we going after? What's the title, right? What's the persona that we're going after? What's the firmographics of the company they work at? What's the size? What's the industry? What's the footprint? I don't need to be right. I had an old coworker that says, don't get it right, get it written. So we wrote it down. We started working off of that. Then that allowed me to focus on like, I need to go find 10 people like this. but that's like every founder's dream. Like that's, I think at the end of the day, that's why we're here, because we're really good at, when you point me to a problem, I can devour the problem, but I need the problem pointed at first. Right. So that was kind of just there's no secret sauce. You just got to pick a goal and then just try to find a way to get in front of as many of the people that fit within your profile as you can.
I love that. So it seems like it wasn't just one channel. It was every channel. It was VCs. It was your network. It was asking people for referrals. It was using the user interviews, office hours. Sage Tap, is it the last one I heard?
Yeah. Sage Tap. Yeah. Sage Tap is a bit of it's like a speed dating for vendors and buyers. It's kind of interesting.
Cool.
It's pretty neat.
I'll find the links and throw them in the show notes if anybody's curious. And so you talked to 10 people, you repeated that 3 times as you refined your hypothesis. At what point did you start building, or did, the tech people start building?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, we were building day one, because what we said to ourselves is, if we were going to solve a help desk problem, what are the things that are going to have to be there no matter what? Like, they're non-negotiable. As you think about, I'm a help desk leader, I'm going to trust Fixify to take on my help desk. Well, one, I need to be able to talk to your end users. So I need a communication channel, right? Is that integrating with Slack? Is that, we building our own chatbot? Like, what are we doing? We need to have a data set. We need to be able to store data. We need to do that in a secure way. So a lot of the architecture was starting to get built. Those are bets, right? Some of them we got right. Some of them we got wrong. The point was, we had to be moving in some direction, right? We couldn't just be waiting for the market feedback to come back. We had to make some bets.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, what percentage of those bets do you think paid off, and what percentage were throwaway?
Ooh, okay. Well, so it's funny. I'll give you both the business bets and then also I call it the technical bet. So if I relook at our pitch deck, I think it's like 11 slides. So keep it nice and tight. I think 3 of them were completely wrong, like completely off in what we were doing. But the general motion was like, we're going west, right? We're heading that way. So we were still going in the right direction. None of them were wrong enough to obviously destroy the company. But I think that's tough. Again, I've only ever been right about 70% of the time in anything. Some people will probably argue I've only been right 30% of the time in anything. So you kind of want to make those bets. Things like, for our target customers, what are the problems that they have, right? What are the solutions that exist in the market? Why are they not choosing to use those, right? Those are things you think you don't know until you talk to people, right? So that was on the business side. On the technical side, right? There was the time Fixify was born, ChatGPT was blowing up, LLMs were a big thing. So we're keeping a close eye on, is this technology that's showing up really going to absorb the entire help desk solution, right? Like, is it all just going to be chatbots and robots, right? Guess what? I was like, yeah, it probably is. Like, there's probably a big part of this that's going to be AI and LLM driven. You start talking to IT leaders and they're like, my users don't want to talk to a chatbot.
God, no.
Yeah. They don't want that.
I'm the guy who I dial in and I get the automated phone and I immediately, I'm like, let's just see if it works. 0000000.
Oh.
And then sometimes, it works. And sometimes I got to call back because it froze the phone system, or it just hangs up on you or whatever. But
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, and I was going to say, and so again, as you look at the thing, you got to try to have to get right, because otherwise it causes you time, and time is very expensive, is the core one-way door decisions, right? It's that, I think it's a Netflix term or Amazon term. It's like
Amazon.
Amazon. Yeah. One-way doors and two-way doors, right? You got to really pause and say, are we making a one-way door decision where you can't walk back through it? Or is it a two-way door decision where if we need to walk through it or walk back, it's going to be okay? And that's where you need to slow down and be like, hold on, even architecturally, like, what kind of decisions are we making? Are we hosting this thing in AWS? Great. That's going to help us move much faster with our developers. And so those are some of the decisions that I think are important that I would pause on and be like, hold on, let me sanity check those.
Can you tell me about a bad bet that didn't work out, either technically or on the business side?
Oh yeah. So we originally thought the company was going to be focused on organizations like small, like 50, 60, 70 employees, maybe like 100, 150. What we realized is most of those organizations have an IT person and they're crushing it, right? They're building automation, they're building tools, and the business itself, their complexity hasn't evolved enough to need help, right? What does that mean? What are the components of a company that become complex? One is the technology stack, right? So we use a joke, which is, how many tiles do you have in your single sign-on tool, right? So you have to scroll, you've now outgrown, right, the one IT person or the local managed service provider, right? So that's number one. Number two is has IT become the infrastructure backbone for the company, right? Does legal rely on IT to track things, right? Or is there workflows related to legal things and contract review? When new hires start, is your employee experience team now saying, hey, we need to define a process here. We need repeatability. Is security showing up and saying, hey, we got audits now, right? We got to make sure we're tracking everything. And so when IT is no longer about just supporting end users and it's strategic to the company and it's now supporting the whole company, that's when we were like, okay, then it becomes serious enough where an investment makes sense, right? And as a startup, you want to find the buying moment. You want to find the moment that the need is the most, so you can come in and obviously take advantage of that. And so we started to realize there's a size element there that we completely missed on when we first kind of pitching the company. And so we adjusted, right? We redirected, okay, we got to be a little bit bigger. And that was a lesson learned, and quickly change and start targeting those customers or prospects.
Love it. So 3 rounds of 10, you started selling and building on day one. How long did it take you to land that first customer?
Oh, good question. So we started the company in September. This is a bit of another thing that I screwed up, but which we could have a whole episode on that. It was February. So like 6-7 months into the company, but we had kind of our first person that was like, hey, I'm super interested. I'm in, kind of gave you the verbal. And so I had this really beautiful, like waterfall style plan, right? It was February. March, I was going to do like a light POC. April, we were going to do an assessment on how that went. I was going to then do pricing in May, contracting in June. And by July, we'd have our first customer, even before our first year of the company being born. That person looked at me dead now and be like, why can't we just turn this on tomorrow? And I was like, I mean, you're kind of, I mean, yeah, I could figure all that. I mean, you could figure out pricing real quick, because what ended up happening is he asked me that question. I went back to the founders and the rest of the team and I'm like, well, we have to build a pricing model, but we're probably going to redo the pricing anyway. So why do I have to spend a month on a price? Like, no. Right. And so we started to really understand like how much process and over exaggeration was I inserting in the whole thing versus like, let's go and see what works. And we're now 15, well, we haven't hit our 2-year mark yet. So 15, 16 months in, still using the same pricing model.
There you go.
Haven't had to change it, right? Still using the original MSA. Haven't had to change it. Slight changes here and there, but it goes to show you, like, sometimes you create these big bespoke steps and put them in your way, when in reality, customers like, hey, get that out of here. Like, let's go. Right.
I remember we got early days, my first company, we had some grant to help us hire a designer, and the company was Voltage CRM. And it was an analogy on like the voltage in a pipe. Voltage is basically pressure, electrical pressure in a pipeline or on a line. And so that was the idea, is like apply voltage to your pipeline.
Yeah.
Is CRM. And we had a designer spend like a whole week, if not 2 weeks, designing this really complicated like engine diagram for the website. And I remember finishing it. I'm like, man, this is awesome. And I love it. But like, we just wasted so much of our cycles doing something that means nothing. And it looks great, but like, I put way too much time into this thing that means absolutely nothing.
Yeah. No. And that's some of the lessons you learn. Like, where does it make sense to spend time? Where are you unnecessarily solving for risks that don't exist yet? Or like, I'd love to have problems where I have enough demand where my pricing model needs to be adjusted, right? Like, I'd love to have that problem, right? And so something we pay attention to as well is, are we signing ourselves up for future problems that we don't need to be solving yet? At the same time, making sure we're laying good foundations in, right? So we don't have problems that are unsolvable, right? Later down the line. So
totally. Tell me about that first customer. Where did they come from? Were they part of the research process or somewhere else?
Yeah, they ended up coming through the friends and family networks. Didn't know the person, didn't know the buyer. We knew someone at the company, and we, obviously, hey, we're starting a company. Would love to talk to you about it. Who your company runs this department? They're like, oh, it's this person over here. So that helped a little bit in what I call like the transfer trust, right? So I would argue that a lot of our early customers started from a position of trust. And so what that allows us to do is almost skip the first 2 steps in pitching a prospect, right? Which is outside of just understanding the problem, is building that trust. Can this company do what I'm asking to do? It's a startup. And so that really was helpful to us, because then we were able to get like, okay, is the solution the right solution? Right. And can we actually close a customer? Like, do we actually have the skills to close an actual customer? And so now, as we're looking at the broader go-to-market engine, we're like, great, what gymnastics did that person do for us because they trusted us that we're not going to get from a cold call, right? That we're not going to get from an outbound SDR call, right? And so now we're going back and saying, we do have to think about those things.
Mhm. Yeah. I remember somebody asking, being on a sales call, like asked for a case study. And it was one of those like head slapping moments where I'm like, no, I don't have
Okay.
any. I'm like, I've got tons of happy customers, but I haven't gone and done the work. And as soon as we had those case studies to share with people, after the first call, like our close rates went way up. It was one of those obvious things that I'm like, of course we should have had, but we didn't. So first customer took 7 months, came from the friends and family network. There's a handful of customers, maybe a couple of handfuls of customers that have closed since. What was the general source, lead source on those ones? Friends and
Yeah.
family,
So
hustle.
yeah, it's kind of nuts because we have graphs now. We're
Mhm.
we're 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 growing up, and it's interesting because we have a graph that's like, where did it come from? And it's a bar chart, and it's or stacked bar chart. It's all different colors, right? So it's
Mhm.
not all the same, right? We've got some that came from those expert platforms like office hours. We have some that came from our VC introductions. We have some that came from our friends and family. And so that's why at the beginning I was like, look, you got to set a goal and you got to go where you got to go to get the customers, because you're not looking for you're not trying to find the platform or yeah, you're not trying to find the platform necessarily. And I would argue, yes, you're trying to find the customer, but you're actually trying to find the right customer. I would consider all these very early adopters folks because they're like, why would I trust you to do my help desk? Right. So by nature, that persona is a little bit different. And so you have to kind of pick up on that as well and do some sorting early on and make sure like you're going after that. So how do you know someone is an early adopter? Well, go on their LinkedIn, see who they follow, see what companies they follow. There are some tools you could buy to figure out what tech they're using, right? And so they've got 3 or 4 pieces of technology or vendors in there. You can Google when those companies were established, right? You can start to figure those things out. They're probably posting a lot, right? They're probably doing a lot of things in modern technology like AI. So there's things you can do to figure that out. They're probably connected to VCs, right? In their LinkedIn. So there are things you could do to assess that, because what you're trying to figure out is, how do I find the right people to build this with me? Not how do I just
Mhm.
find people, right?
And that's such a good point because you go back to the technology adoption lifecycle. The folks that are the innovators, that are the early adopters, is a dramatically different persona than the early majority, the late majority. And the early
Yeah.
majority is going to be the bulk of folks, but it's those crazy few that are going to help take a chance on something like Fixify being their first customer. Like I remember my first customer ever, Bob, he had, he was out of his mind to pick us and to be
Yeah.
their
Yeah.
CRM company, but they were the whole company was super happy. And when we tried to go and replicate it, we found like Bob was just such a niche of one. And so how did you filter down for that? Like in your process, what did that look like for you? Was it just naturally you were getting all these early adopters, or were there some late majority folks that just weren't willing to move forward or weren't willing to have conversations?
Yeah. Outside of obviously trying to make sure that you bring in the right people into your pipeline, right? And
Mhm.
making sure you're going after the right folks, even looking through profiles. I remember hours looking through some of these expert databases, right? They basically connect to LinkedIn, right? And they help you get access to folks. And I would pass over folks that I felt that didn't fit just for where we are as a company, right? So that's the first piece, is making sure that people. The second piece is, once you get on a call with them, if they're describing your product back to you and they're giving you feature add-ons versus challenging you on your decisions, you're like, yes, right? Because what they're saying is, I've been trying to build the thing you're building. I already built the thing you're building.
Thinking about it.
Yeah.
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 I built it in Excel, or I built it in by cobbling these. I got duct tape and, cardboard holding it together.
Yes. And so that's usually when you get those lean in moments, you're like, okay, cool. I don't have to pull this person. They're pulling me. They're like, come on, let's go. Right. And it doesn't mean that the other folks you're talking to aren't a good fit. You just Fixify might not be ready for them. Right. Because it's the use cases, the customer referrals, right? Um, all of those things that we might not be ready for.
Last question for you. I want you to describe what it felt like when you finally felt like you had product market fit.
Ooh, I still think we're on that journey, to be clear. I think what it felt like was, okay, cool. We're seeing a pattern. The pattern is telling us that there are more than 1, 2, 3, 10, 15 folks that are responding positively, right? What is responding positively? It's, are you willing to move through the pipeline and potentially move to a commercial transaction, right? Figure that out quickly and doing that in a measurable way. So we've got like the pretty pipeline now. There's things going in through the top. They're going through the process. We're measuring all that. So that's good from a data driven perspective. But what it feels like is like, okay, cool. Now that we understand that, how do we do that at scale? Right. So you take a moment to appreciate the fact that you've got a handful of people that are interested in what you're doing, and you're starting to see more pipeline generate. But now you're starting to think about, okay, how do I understand this new system, right? And how do I continue to make sure that we're learning from it? You and I talked about, hey, as you're moving to a broader set of customers, they're going to require things like, hey, you got a white paper to look at, right?
Mhm.
You got some customer testimonials, kind of talk to some of your customers, right? And so that you got to pay attention to those things and make sure that you're maturing things up as you're doing that so that you can, to your point, see a better conversion rate and see people go through.
Can I'd love to narrow in on that precise moment where you realized, I think I've got something. Tell me, like, do you remember that time, that moment, that first time where you're like, oh, I feel something here?
Yeah, it's good. I can't tell you what day it was. It was probably a Friday. Most of my emotions start to drum up on a Friday. I don't know why. But what it was multiple calls back to back where people were like, I've built the thing you're building. I've always wanted the thing you're building. I saw your website and it literally felt like I wrote it. Right. And so when you see that pattern, you're like,
Mhm.
okay, I'm starting to see a light reaction from the market. Right. And so that moment, like, okay, cool. I've narrowed down on the hypothesis. I've narrowed down on potentially the minimum lovable product, right? Because we're talking about the solution. And I've narrowed down on who I think the buyer is, right? The reason I'm always hesitant, always pausing is because I think that's going to evolve, right? And then we're going to continue to innovate and learn, and hopefully the pie is going to grow. But like that moment made me feel comfortable in that one slide that you were just to describe what it is. And so now it's like, okay, now how do we continue to iterate from there?
Love it. Mace, thank you so much for sharing. This has been a real treat to get to hear the story kind of start to finish like this. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
If people are trying to want to reach out and ask you any questions about the journey, what's the best way for them to get in touch? Or if they want to
Oh,
learn about Fixify?
yeah, sure. Go to our website, get those requests come in through me and through my sales leader, as well as you can hit me up on LinkedIn. I just connect on LinkedIn. Happy to exchange messages, and Colin knows how to reach me too. So those are many, many ways.
Yeah, you hit me up and I'll happily make an intro to Mace. Anyway, man, thank you so much for coming on, and thanks to everybody
Yep.
for listening.
Thank you.
Catch y'all next time. Yeah.
Yep.